So I'm with Andy Schell on his new boat, Ice Bear. And I'm getting a lot of negative stuff, which is very true, but you also got to guard against the sum of all your fears. Well, their fears.
You're getting a lot of negative stuff from readers, or
From people who
saying don't buy an old fiberglass boat,
or saying these
horror
there are
stories.
so many horror stories, and these are guys, many of them, who have real expertise.
Yeah.
People like Steve D'Antonio, you read his site and it could scare the hell out of you. It's all good information. But,
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
what an osmosis job really takes to do right.
Yeah.
What happens if you've got a bad core, and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Now, Andy's always my go-to guy when I want the positive view.
Keep it positive. That's right.
Keep it positive, but he's also got a lot of miles, and he's had how many fiberglass boats have you had, Andy?
Well, this is my third personally.
Yeah.
But if you count the boats I grew up on with my dad and my dad's current boat, which I helped refit, it's four with my dad's current boat, and then growing up, he's on his sixth or seventh now, all fiberglass boats. So,
yeah. So
there's a lot in our family.
Here's two things I'm going to get your opinion on.
Sure.
Is the risks of buying an old fiberglass boat and how to ameliorate that if they're solid core, solid without core.
Yeah.
Particularly issues like osmosis, secondary bonding, boats that just weren't built very well. Like how do you come at that? How much can you ameliorate that risk? Can you get rid of that risk altogether?
I mean,
that you buy a boat and you get a big osmosis problem, you get a fat bill.
Yeah, I don't have any. The only experience I have with osmosis was a friend had a Tartan 37, an S&S Tartan 37 centerboard, and he had the little tiny blisters in the bottom, and I helped him do a not the right way to do it. But then again, everybody that I've talked to said that, okay, you have osmosis, like it's not going to sink the boat, depending on the severity of it. But again, I don't want to speak about the osmosis stuff because I've thankfully never had a boat that's had the problem. And all the boats that we've bought have had either not had the problem in the first place or it would have been addressed.
And these are all old boats, right?
The first one was Arcturus, 1966.
Right.
She's still sailing in Sweden by the guy we sold her to now. And she'd been very well taken care of by the previous owner and had I'm not sure what lengths she went to, but they had repaired some minor blisters and then done the barrier coating, that kind of basic stuff. Steve would probably say it wasn't enough. But I mean, the hull at the waterline's that thick too, and we weren't, we didn't have any issues with the boat when we had it. So I've never really had any of the issues that you were talking about, or had them and didn't know about them, and it didn't matter. So maybe I'm just ignorant, but hey,
you're also not drowned.
I'm exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so that's great. That's a great read of that.
Yeah.
Have you had any secondary bonding problems on all these boats? This is like bulkheads that are no longer properly attached to the boat. This kind of thing.
Not that I'm aware of, and we never had any sort of issues where it felt like something was wrong, and we never identified an issue.
That thing up.
So. Now, one cool thing, thinking back to Arcturus. You read Hal Roth, I'm sure.
Yeah.
He's got a book called After 50,000 Miles, which is what he did to his first Spencer 35, which was a 60s era fiberglass boat, very similar to Arcturus. And incidentally, part of the reason we bought Arcturus when we got it, the guy we bought it from was tennis buddies with Hal Roth. Hal lived on the Eastern Shore until he died. We bought the boat in Oxford, Maryland. Anyway, long story short, Hal had reinforced the hull to deck joint on his Spencer 35. And kind of removed all the bolts and fasteners and fiberglassed it and did all this stuff. And Ben, the guy we bought Arcturus from, had did the same thing to the Seabreeze with Hal's input. And then also put a aluminum tow rail on it in place of the old teak through-bolted kind of tow rail. So that was a really cool upgrade. And that thing didn't leak a drop of water. A lot of those old boats have the hull to deck joint issues. That's what I've more than anything else you're talking about. But that was addressed previously and sounded like it was a big job, but we were the beneficiaries of it.
Yeah, I think something I noticed though in everything you've done is on your first boat on Arcturus you leveraged a lot of work and expense that somebody else had done, right? Yeah. Somebody else had spent 10 years.
But we paid that back in Eastbjorn.
Right. No. I'm not criticizing you.
Yeah.
And then I just want to point this out to people too. And then with your subsequent boats and your dad's boat, you bought boats that were extremely high quality
Yeah.
when they came out of the yard. Very very expensive boats.
I
the day
really
they
liked
come out of the
I
boat.
really liked your perspective on what was the situation at the yard at the time the boat was built. And both of our Swans, so
Yeah.
talk about Swan because that's what I'm most familiar with. There's a guy called Lars Ström that they call the Professor. The Swan Owners Group's called the Professor. And he worked at the yard when both of our boats were built. He's retired now, but he is a fountain of knowledge. And you can email him, and he's retired, so he emails you right away. And if you have any question whatsoever, not only how your particular series was built, but he knows the differences between hull numbers. Like Eastbjorn was hull number 2, and things changed after that as they evolved to the building process, as they normally do. But Lars was there. He was, I'm not sure what his title was, but he was the foreman of the construction at the yard. So he can tell me exactly how things were made and then how to address it if there's any problems. So having that resource, and he doesn't, I think he would charge you if you hired him to do a full-on consultation thing, but he'll happily answer emails till the cows come home.
When you're talking about buying even a $75,000 boat, paying somebody like that
Yeah.
$1,000 or $500 or anything. Why people don't do that more often is always beyond me.
The other thing, the S&S Owners Association, because I personally think what you said before we recorded, like, go buy an old S&S Swan and you're going to be way ahead of the game for some of this structural stuff, and you've got all these resources. The S&S Owners Group has to be one of the most active owners groups in the world, and they have all the knowledge, all the resources. They're even reproducing some of this stuff, paraphernalia, but they have there's such an active group there that are passionate about these boats, and they've all done all the work. Everybody knows what, there's nothing that hasn't been done, because they're all built the same. They all have these big steel I-beams in the keel holding the keel on and the mast step on and stuff. So that's been an invaluable resource for us, having that. And same thing with the Seabreeze, the Allied Seabreeze. They built 156 of them, I think, and they had a super active owners group. And if you had a question about anything, Ben even warned us. He's like, before you do anything to the boat, go ask the Owners Association, because somebody's probably done it already and can tell you what to.
That's great
what
advice.
To do.
I think that I just want to re-emphasize this because I think it's so important.
Yeah.
And that was a high quality, high end boat.
Yeah.
The day she came out of the yard.
Yeah.
And you're going to pay more for that. If you buy a no-name cheap boat that was cheap when it came out of the yard, well, if it was cheap when it came out of the yard, 30 years later, it's probably not going to be real kind to it.
Yeah.
30 more years on top of cheap.
And here's the thing too. Like I think, like we said before we recorded, if everybody read word for word what you have on your site, you did it all, you'd have a perfect boat, but you wouldn't have any money and you would never go cruising. So you got to find the balance. And I know you've acknowledged that in some of your writing and stuff as well. But like I always use Matt Rutherford as an example of like, look, he took this Alban Vega that he literally dumpster dived to reinforce the main bulkhead and do some stuff. And I'm not advocating to do that, but he did it, and he made it. And at some point, you have to cover the bases with safety and structural stuff that can cause serious safety problems. But at another level, you're talking about comfort at some point. Like, yeah, okay, so the hatches leak. Well, okay, you can still go sailing. We got a bunch of hatches and ports that leak on this thing. Well, we've sailed 10,000 miles this year on it because I haven't had time to fix it yet. So that stuff's not going to sink the boat. It's going to make my bunk wet in the back. But hey, it's an adventure.
Now, that's great. The only thing I think that people do have to recognize when they hear you say that is you're sailing with a bunch of people that are with you for a couple of weeks or a week, and that's all part of the adventure to them.
Right.
It depends on what and I did a huge amount of that sailing too, and back in my ocean race days, lying on a bunch of folded up sails and
yeah, I'm not saying
in my own
I'm not
puke.
advocating for it.
And equally that's a very good way to make damn sure that you never go sailing again if that's not your thing, or to make very sure that your spouse never goes sailing with you again.
My point is you can fix that stuff over time too.
Yeah.
We have a week between each trip, and slowly but surely we're addressing all that stuff. And the other hand, you don't know that stuff until you go sailing. Some of it.
Yeah, I did that with my fastener. It wasn't that I put my fastener on the land and worked on it for 13 years.
Yeah.
I was sailing it right from the day I bought it.
Yeah.
And I did my first trip after 5 years, and water pissed in on our heads, and the boat creaked, and we wondered whether the main bulkhead was going to fly out halfway to Newport, but it didn't. And
but then I always preach. I always talk about to our crew that, like, look, you have to look at the look at the likelihood of something happening and the consequences. So when we got this boat, we put it into service immediately because the major stuff had already been done very recently and been surveyed. The rig was new in 2015. The sails were new in 2015. All the stuff that's like deal breaker stuff, like, all right, don't go offshore if you're not sure about the chain plates, etc. All that stuff was done, and we got the boat knowing that and put it straight into service.
Would you buy a boat with core under the waterline? Or in the hull? None of your boats have core, correct
Since
me
you
if I'm
asked,
wrong.
would I?
Yeah.
No, but I'm not. Don't take that as you shouldn't. I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
Knowing what I know, I wouldn't. I mean, I've limited. Like I said, I'm a sucker for these old swans, and we didn't even have to look at other boats. Our second boat was gonna be a swan because it's also good for the business. But the core under the waterline, I don't see why I would, and any of the boats that I'm interested in wouldn't have that anyway. So it's kind of wouldn't be a decision I'd really have to make, I think.
Yeah, I'm going through it because I'm kind of, as you know, kind of interested in maybe having a higher performance boat for my old age, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
And many of them have core under the waterline.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to get a good read on two questions, and I'm going to be talking to Steve D'Antonio about this, who probably knows more about it than most. Is the first question being, can you, in a survey, if you're willing to spend some money on the surveyor, determine whether you've got a boat that does not have water in the core?
Yeah.
Is that even determinable? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to find out from somebody who does. And then two, if you've done that, how can you take care of the boat to make sure that continues to be true? Because the thing that scares me about cores is, you pointed out about the osmosis thing. Sure, you know, I mean, it's you can fix it. You can peel the boat and fix it, and it probably is not going to sink and drown you.
Yeah.
But I've talked to somebody at a major boat builder in the United States, and they've had some core trouble, and their quote for the same yard to fix it is $100,000 and up.
Yeah.
For 40, because they basically rebuild the boat.
Me. Yeah.
And they have to build a custom jig to put the boat in, because otherwise you take everything off and the boat loses shape.
It'll bend in half.
So they're rebuilding the boat, and they're doing it the right way up, which is brutal because they're working over their heads.
Yeah.
And he said it's just, that's the way it is.
Yeah,
So that's a real, you bought a boat for $100,000 and you find it needs $100,000 repair.
Yeah.
Where you basically tore up $100,000.
I mean, here's the thing. Here's how I tend to think about this stuff. It's like, I tend to believe in engineering, right? So if something's engineered properly, if it's more complicated, and a cord hull is more complicated than a solid fiberglass hull, right? That doesn't mean it's bad if it's engineered properly and it's built properly and it's maintained properly. I don't know enough about the cord thing to give you a flat yes or no, but I will say that philosophically, I would find out, how is it engineered? Was it, and this is what you talk about too, did the engineering make it to the boatyard when they built it? And then was it maintained properly by the thing? And I think if all that stuff, check the boxes and all that stuff, I don't think there's any reason not to if you want a fast boat.
I think the frightening thing is that, and as you say, that a lot of due diligence has to be done, because, for example, we take, so I gather, I don't have solid proof on this, but for example, Tillotson Pearson, who built a huge number of very, very good boats, but at various times in the life of the company, they also built boats that are fundamentally very badly compromised, as I heard. I don't know that that's true. And for example, the other company that I talked to, that gave me the $100,000 price, this is one of the United States' most premium boat builders.
Yeah.
And the guy I talked to was quite honest. He said, we were at the bleeding edge of that particular core material and doing the job. And, so here's a very high-end boat that somebody probably paid $1 million for. And now in this case, if you paid $1 million for it and you had $1 million and it's a $100,000 repair, that's probably not a world end up. But for you and I buying a $100,000 boat and then finding we basically got a worthless boat, that's pretty depressing. So I think it's a downside. Would you agree it's a downside risk issue for these old boats? The downside risk is probably fairly low.
You've got the kind of, it's one more thing to think about. It's the same thing with people asking me, why aren't you interested in a centerboard boat? It's like, well, it's just one more thing to deal with. One more thing to think about. if you have a boat and you just have to accept the added maintenance, or not necessarily maintenance, but you have to think a little bit differently than you would. You can be a little bit more cavalier maybe, or sleep better at night if you're in a solid fiberglass hull, because the consequences of grounding it or hitting something or whatever are probably less than they are on a cord boat.
Yeah, I think it's good wisdom. Yeah.
And that's kind of, and I've always tried to eliminate as many of those things as you can for myself, because I don't like doing maintenance. And that's also the same philosophy as why I've tended to, on these older boats, as soon as I have a problem with a system, junk it and get a new one. Now that's easy to say, like the drone, it's a business and I can afford to do that, but I'd rather be able to maintain something from new rather than try and fix everybody else's errors.
I'm totally with you. We're having we have a constant debate on the site, from the people who've done refits,
Yeah.
and love working on their boats, and people like you and me who really love going sailing.
Yeah.
And to me, I mean, I've done it. I rebuilt an old fiberglass boat.
Yeah.
But I for every hour doing that I wasn't sailing, to me, I'm 68 years old now. That's an hour I'm never getting back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you actively enjoy it, cool.
Yeah,
But
point about what was the situation at the boatyard. Friends of ours have an Ericsson 38, which I think is an awesome boat. Maybe not for crossing oceans on, but they've been back and forth to the Bahamas on it, no problem. It's a great cruising boat, cheap. But the Ericsson boats, when Ericsson stopped building boats, the molds were bought by Pacific Seacraft. So even though their boat's an Ericsson 38, it's actually a Pacific Seacraft Ericsson 38. And if you look at the owners' forums and stuff, and they're built, because Pacific Seacraft has a pretty good reputation for building solid boats, so they're built slightly differently than the original. Same boat, same hull, everything, but they're built a little bit better, a little bit stronger, like the way the through hulls are attached and stuff like that. And that's to your point of what was the situation at the boatyard when you bought the boat.
yeah, because I mean, Pacific Seacraft, I've also heard, I can't confirm this for sure, but there's some bad Pacific Seacraft built boats out there too.
Yeah. Because of they keep the name and they change all the stuff. And exactly. I mean, even Swan's owned by an Italian company.
Yeah.
So kind of with Swan, there's sort of two camps, kind of three. There's like, it's not a real Swan unless it's an SNS. Like people just said, all right, after they changed designers, it's not a real Swan. But then there's another camp, like me, I have one of each. I got a Frere Swan that, okay, up until the mid-90s, the Frere Swans also count because they were more conservatively built, longer, thin keel, rounded sections forward of the mast, so it doesn't pound. And then you've got the late 90s, early 2000s, and I think it was sold to the Italians in early 2000s, and they're the much more high-performance Mediterranean-style boats that have a real skinny, long, bulb keel. They're not, the primary design goal wasn't crossing oceans. It was, they can cross oceans, they're built really well, but they're going to be saleable in the Med and elsewhere and stuff.
Actually, I saw one being repaired in Maine.
Yeah.
And she'd hit a ledge in Maine, not that hard.
Yeah.
And it took $130,000 to repair her because they had used this terrible boat building thing that's technique now of a glued in web to take where the keel bolts don't actually go through the web, so you're completely dependent on the glue joint.
Yeah.
Of course, that the guys on Cheeky Rafiki found out how that ends.
Yeah.
And she was built the same way, and it was, I think, like I've got it on the site, but it was like $120,000 or something to fix her, having just basically touched a ledge in Maine.
Yeah.
Now, okay, Maine ledges are hard, but that
Well,
seems excessive for a quality boat.
Well, that's, I was asking Lars about this because we were tempted when we got the 59. This is a German Frears designed 59, designed in the mid-80s. This one was built in 91. But I was, my all-time favorite boat's an SNS 65. The Ketch, the first Whitbread. I mean, they're awesome.
Yeah.
And I was asking Lars, I said, all right, all things equal, because we can probably get a 65 for a little bit more than we paid for this, but man, that'd be cool. I said, all things equal, which one's a better boat? Because he was there when they were both built. And he didn't say which one was better, but the 65 is thicker in all regards. The hull's thicker. It's a much heavier boat, shorter waterline length. So performance-wise, this is probably going to be faster. But Lars was saying that the 65s were still built, 30 years earlier. But then you've got it's 20 years older than this boat, So pretty much you got all that stuff, and I already have an NS Swan from the 70s, and I know exactly what all those problems were, and I didn't want to go through that again. And you can buy an SNS 65 that's had all that done for $600,000. The one we could afford was going to need all that stuff, and I said, no, I'm not doing that.
No, I agree. That's because that's not, when you wrote that piece for us, and I thought it was so good, you ended it, what I've learned from all my refits
Yeah.
is I do refits, not rebuilds.
Yeah.